Chapter 3, Growing Up. In kindergarten, I enjoyed the simplicity of going to school and doing easy things. After that, I did not like school or the homework required, which seemed rather pointless and time-consuming. The only thing I remember about my kindergarten teacher is she yelled at me for smudging the green check mark she would write on my paper. She graded our papers as she walked in between our desks. I wondered why smudging the ink was wrong. I thought it made the check mark look like it was flying. Getting yelled at always made me recoil in shame and brought tears to my eyes. That teacher seemed old and angry. She must be an old maid just like the one in the card game, I thought. In fact, maybe they were one and the same. There was a day when we learned how to make paper snowflakes. A little boy came over to show me his, and I said, "Mine's better." I was just giving my honest assessment. He went away crying. I felt bad afterwards. From that moment on, I always tried to take other people's feelings into consideration when talking to them. That little boy was the best friend of my crush, and I hoped it didn't affect my chances with him. Even at that young age, I was attracted to boys. The day we learned sign language for "I love you" was the day I walked up to him and made the sign to him. Then I ran back to my desk. He just went back to whatever he was doing. There was a sandbox in the classroom, and one day a mean boy poured sand in my hair, which had grown down past my waist. Mom was furious because she had to wash my hair several times. It was no picnic for me either. She said the boy probably did it because he liked me. I thought that was the most backwards thing I had ever heard. I made sure to steer clear of the sandbox after that day. First grade was easier because I liked my teacher. She was about Mom's age and really nice to me. She sang songs with us every day. I've always loved to sing, so this was fun for me. Music is unique in its connective capabilities in the fact that it lets people enjoy it without needing to speak to each other or interact. Even just singing in a group, such as in church, as we did when I was growing up, we were all interacting without being interactive, without needing to look at each other. We were all reading the words and music on the page of the hymnal, yet connecting and making something beautiful at the same time, all in the present moment together. Second grade was not so fun. This was the year we lived in a southern state instead of the snowy north, which was hot all the time. I didn't do well in the heat. My body didn't seem to know how to sweat, so I was not a happy camper. Actually, I did not enjoy extreme temperature of any kind. Plus, the new school decided my brother was a genius, so I must be too. They gave me 100 math problems to do every night on top of all the other subjects. Mom had to help me, and we were up past 9 p.m. every night. That was late for me as a 7-year-old, and I was exhausted. Mom finally called the school to complain and ask why I had so many math problems to do. When they told her the reason, she told them my brother and I were different and I was unable to handle all the extra work. It would have been nice if they consulted us first instead of just piling it on. The most horrible part was my teacher. She was a yeller. The floors were hard tile, so sound bounced and echoed loudly around the enclosed room. Every day she would yell at some kid for something. I cried every single time she yelled. I also cried whenever the boy in the front row cried. He missed his dad, who was on duty in the military. I could feel his pain. One day the teacher made an announcement. "When I yell, I'm not yelling at all of you, so you don't need to worry about it," she said, looking directly at me. That idea had not occurred to me and was a revelation. Still, I didn't like her yelling. That year was so hard, I cried myself to sleep every night. That was the year I was also dealing with the church nemesis described in chapter 1 and had no friends described in chapter 2. When Dad made the decision to move us back to the state we lived in before second grade, it took us away once again from his own family, and I couldn't help but think he was rescuing me from a place I hated. Seeing him cry as we drove away from his parents and siblings broke my heart. I didn't want him to cry because of me. Looking back, I am sure there were other factors in the decision, but at the time, I took on the guilt of his tears. Third grade was mostly fun. I had a homely, rotund teacher. She was docile, so I liked her. She never yelled, but could be stern if a situation called for it. One day I got into trouble for nothing. The boy sitting across from me started laughing. He said I was making a funny face. In actuality, I was in my own world and staring into nothingness. The teacher had to get on to me 3 times before I finally just looked down at my desk instead. It was a strangely overwhelming feeling, being in trouble for nothing and not knowing how to fix it. Fourth grade was when I really started to like art class because it was what now stood out as easier than all the other classes. Lunch, recess, and art were all my favorites. I have always followed the path of least resistance. I like to keep life simple. This was another grade where I had a teacher similar to Mom's age, and she was always in a good mood, so I liked her. This was around the time I developed a head tic, most likely due to the stresses of friends dumping me and family secrets being bottled and hidden inside me. It took me quite a few years to really get a handle on it and not do it anymore. Fifth grade was the start of middle school, so it was naturally a much bigger place with more kids. I didn't like that part, but my teacher was fairly easygoing. This was the year of my second fainting spell. The first was when I was 7. I had a tooth pulled and was begging Mom to let me see in the mirror. When she finally relented, I went straight to the floor, much to her horror, but not without banging my head on the tub first. Luckily, I didn't feel it because I was already tingly and numb all over. Mom had no time to catch me because it happened so fast. This time around, I was taking a test with a misunderstanding. The teacher had us all take out a blank piece of paper. We were to write our answers down as the questions were read aloud. I mistakenly thought we were supposed to write both the questions and the answers. Lack of specification was once again making my life harder. It was happening so fast, but no one else seemed rushed. I got so anxious that my brain shut down, and I slid out of my chair. I got to go home early that day. This was the year I got braces, and I would wear them until right before college. I was born with an underbite and crossbite, and my mouth was too small for all my teeth. I even had a year of speech therapy when I was in second grade until they figured out it was my jaw placement that was causing the problem. So after a surgery in which they pulled 4 baby molars and 4 adult molars under the gums, I got a device in the roof of my mouth, which widened the palate. Mom had to turn a key in it every night. Then came braces and nighttime headgear to correct the jaw alignment and to get the teeth all pulled forward. They said my teeth were slow movers. It was either years of orthodontics or the break your jaw surgery at age 30. They let me choose, and I am quite sure I would never choose jaw surgery if I had to do it over again. At the time, my main motivation was to look somewhat normal during my dating years instead of having an off-center jaw and crowded teeth. Since my teeth were very slow, my last baby tooth took forever to come out. It had to be pulled. In fact, all my baby teeth had been pulled except just one that came out on its own. At a routine orthodontic visit, the doctor said, "Well, we've waited long enough on this last stubborn baby tooth. It's time to pull it. Nurse, get me some lidocaine, will you?" he hollered at her. I was in panic mode. I hadn't had time to process another tooth pulling, and here the doctor was with a huge syringe aimed at my mouth. I had no choice but to lay there and allow it. When the doctor told Mom about getting ready to start phase 2 of the braces, she said she didn't recall there was supposed to be a phase 2, which would mean more money. He responded curtly, "No problem, we'll just rip them off her teeth right now." My eyes grew wide with terror as I shifted my attention to Mom. No, that won't be necessary. We'll do it," she stammered. That doctor was something else. His younger partner was nice and gentle, but he was not. 6th grade wasn't abnormal in any way, except the DARE officer in training seemed to take a liking to me, but I was 11 years old, so that was weird. He just glanced at me once in a while. In my DARE book at the end of the program, he wrote that I was very special and I would be a beautiful young woman one day. It was my first ever compliment from the male species and made me feel all tingly and important. I would like to think he just sincerely wanted to encourage me at a time when I was an awkward preteen and had no confidence in myself. That summer we lived in a third world country while Dad was preaching over there. He actually stayed 6 months on that trip, with previous and subsequent trips in the spring and fall lasting for 6 weeks at a time. This went on for a few years. We just got used to not having Dad around twice a year. Living there for a summer made me appreciate the luxuries we had back home. Safe water to drink, up-to-date hospitals that are clean, working phone lines, etc. I also enjoyed a more simple way of living over there. It was a mixed bag of positives and negatives. When we traveled by train, the mattresses smelled of urine and roaches crawled on us at night. Our guide from the airport to where Dad lived was a young man in his 20s who tried to befriend me romantically. I was 12. Many people from that country try to marry an American so they can immigrate and have a better life. He also wanted to take my brother outside to smoke and put hair on his chest. Mom told him to back off from both of us, thankfully. Stray animals were everywhere, so no one else thought it out of place when a group of boys in the park threw a stray dog into a pool without steps and low enough water to prevent it from reaching the top. They started to laugh as they watched the dog try in vain to escape the pool. Dad hurried us along to spare us from seeing such a horrendous act of the boys drowning a living creature, but I have never forgotten hearing the ugliness of horrified yelps and cruel laughter mixing together. It was hard to walk away, but we could not reveal our American identity for fear of being followed home and getting mugged. We had heard many such stories of this happening. I couldn't even open my mouth in public because I had braces on my teeth, something that was unheard of in poorer countries. 7th grade was the year that boys started noticing me. Boys in my own school did not act any differently towards me, but older boys in the mall were not shy about checking me out. A high school junior asked me to his prom. Of course, I got a resounding no from Mom and Dad. They knew what he was after. I'm glad someone knew, because I was clueless. One day in French class, the teacher had us pair up to write a script as if we were news anchors. We then had to memorize it and be videotaped reciting it. How this all got done in one class period, I'll never know. For me, memorization of a paragraph in English would take at least an hour, especially at that age. In another language, I would need to practice a lot longer. My best friend, Ringlet Girl, and I were up. I got the first sentence okay, but then I froze. I did not know what to do, and no one intervened. To make matters worse, I was already horrible at being the center of attention. This was overkill to the max. Poor Ringlet Girl was such a perfectionist at getting high grades, and I was ruining her track record. That was the second most embarrassing moment of my life. The first most embarrassing moment happened the very next day. To my horror, The teacher decided we should all watch the tape from yesterday. Surely she will fast forward through hours, I hoped and prayed. Nope. Awkward silence filled the room once again, and a couple kids snickered. I could not watch myself fail that hard again. I looked down and tried to turn invisible, to no avail. That summer, I had to share my room with a 19-year-old girl from the third world country we had lived in the year before. She had been Dad's translator and a Christian convert. She came to America to learn more English. I was to treat her like a sister. Puberty is not the best time to force a roommate on your daughter, especially when your daughter needs seclusion to regenerate her sanity. I hated that girl. She was whiny and competed constantly with the rest of the family for Dad's attention. That summer could not end soon enough. At age 13, I had my first real period. I did not feel I had been prepared for what cramps would feel like, but I don't think anyone can prepare a young girl on what to expect. Each woman's experience is different. Cramps for me felt horrible. They were deep inside to a place I couldn't rub to make feel better, like if I got a bruise on my arm. It felt like someone was injecting acid into my lower abdomen and twisting it with a wrench. I ran all over the house, not knowing what to do. Nothing I did would make it stop. I was only agitating myself, building resistance, and therefore increasing my pain. Mom suggested I sit down to avoid getting myself worked up and to take an aspirin. I could not swallow pills back then. I tried putting it in a fruity drink, but the taste prevented me from following through. The more I resisted the pain, the worse it got. Over the years, I had times where the pain was so bad I threw up. I wished for a hysterectomy, but I knew that wasn't practical. Fast forward to today, over 2 decades later, and I have finally figured out what works. Allowing instead of resisting, sending it love. Eating very little during cramp days to allow the body to do its work without having to digest food at the same time. Eating healthier in general. Resting if possible, eating a spoonful or 2 of mustard, and homeopathic pellets for cramps under the tongue. I actually made a video about all my recommendations for this issue on my main YouTube channel, Healing Soul Transformations. Side note, that channel has been discontinued by myself. I just felt complete with it. In 8th grade, I had given a boy my number through a mutual acquaintance, but he never called. Still, that did not deter me from pining over all the cute boys and fantasizing about my future perfect life with one of them. I still got called out for staring out the window and daydreaming during school. "Earth to Julie," the teachers would say. It embarrassed me. That always worked to snap me back out of my own little world, but I loathed it. Teachers got especially mad if I focused on the moving rotations of the clock on the wall. It was mesmerizing, but when I heard, "Staring at it won't make it go any faster, you know," I decided that was not the best idea. High school was a whole other world. My brother was smart enough to get into a college prep high school, which was free tuition for us since our town didn't have a high school. The taxpayers paid for it. Since he got in, I was a shoo-in. Ringlet Girl got in by her own merit and high grades. One day, a boy in my brother's grade started talking to me after school. I had to ask him to repeat himself 3 times. My ears must have been so anxious to be spoken to by a boy, any boy, that they just plumb quit working when it finally happened. So finally, I just looked at him, shrugged, and shook my head no. He slowly retreated with his friends, looking at me like I was crazy. Great, I thought. I could imagine him later asking my brother what's up with me. Who knew what kind of answer he would get? In anatomy physiology class, it was time to study varying degrees of flesh burns. As the teacher talked in detail on what this entailed, I fainted. I could not help but visualize the words she said as if I were feeling and seeing the burns on my own body. It made me queasy and turned out to be too much for me to handle. I slid onto the floor. According to witnesses, I got up and tried to get back into my seat but fainted again. The teachers asked if I was on drugs. I had never even seen drugs, let alone taken them. They asked if I had breakfast. Yes, a bowl of cornflakes, I replied defensively. How dare they imply I wasn't responsible enough to have eaten something by then? I got to lay down in an empty, quiet room until Mom could come get me. People always remark at how my eyes stay open and I go white as a sheet. From my perspective, I get queasy, tingly, dizzy, and then I wake up laying on the floor feeling as relaxed as ever, like I just woke up from a 1,000-year nap. That moment of waking up relaxed always felt amazingly blissful until I realized I was the center of attention. How embarrassing. High school was the place I finally overcame a fear of public speaking. I just got tired of shaking uncontrollably in front of the class with a beet red face. That physical reaction was so much worse than just standing in front of people. So the next time I had a presentation, I wrote down all the important things my fellow students needed to know. I can't let a shaky voice get in the way of telling them what they need to know, I thought. So I did it. I realized I was speaking the way I had seen Dad preach. I was masking my symptoms with learned and mimicked behavior. Dad had a beautiful delivery with pauses in just the right places to make a point. I was amazed at how well I did. I was even able to glance at a few students' eyes. I was relieved to find most of them uninterested in me anyway. And the ones that were looking were actually listening to what I needed to tell them. It helped to see the teacher nodding with interest and agreement, positive reinforcement and success. Ringlet Girl and I had a great time after school. We would stay and study in the halls, do our homework, and then walk to the library to hunt for fresh boys under the guise of studying. Then we would read the teen magazines and smell the perfume samples in them. After all that hard work, we were hungry, so we would walk across the street. Since I did not have any money or allowance, snacks were on her dime. She seemed quite happy to pay for me. Other days, we would go to the corner store where she would buy us hazelnut cappuccinos, and then we would walk to the park, throw a frisbee, and swing on the swings. We giggled so much. We figured out that we might see more of our crushes at the school sports events, so we went to those whenever we could get a ride. One night I slept over at her house so I could sneak to the homecoming dance. I was not allowed to go to dances. It wasn't anything special, but it was at least good for me to be able to find out I hadn't been missing anything. Graduation was overrated. I would rather just pick up my diploma in the office than make a big production out of it. Marching in rehearsals for several days seemed like a huge waste of time to me. In the summer before college, I got nervous to leave home. I started having heart palpitations and ended up in the ER because one night it happened 6 times in a row. Mom reminded me of all the cappuccinos I had been drinking that year. Did those have caffeine? I asked. I had no clue. My heart seemed to be fine according to the hospital monitors, but I cut back on caffeinated tea, soda, and coffee after that. Milk chocolate was my one exception and one of my favorite treats. During my last year at home, I enjoyed my free time whenever Mom and Dad were out. I cleaned the house to the radio, singing and dancing the whole time. I organized the board games by removing them all from their boxes and bagging up the tiny little pieces. To me, the boxes were just space wasters. To my dismay, Mom made me put them back the way they were. I had to tape all the box corners back together. There was an autistic boy at church, and once when he was at our house, I watched the way he played. Mom, do you think I'm a little bit like him? I asked. No, you don't have what he has, she replied. And that was that. Still, I could see similarities between the two of us. He was at complete peace, just playing on his own, and had long moments of silence, the way I secretly wanted to be all the time. In the previous 4 summers to my senior high school year, Mom and Dad made my brother and I go to a Christian Bible camp affiliated with the college where they met and where we would be attending. Of course, Mom and Dad had to be camp counselors. There were 2 things I loved about that camp in spite of the hot location. 1, the hymnal singing, always a cappella, of all us kids in one auditorium was one of the most beautiful, heavenly things I have ever heard. 2, the teenage boys were 10 times hotter than any of the boys I grew up around. Now, that kind of heat I liked. One year, I was found wandering alone outside and crying. I had heat stroke. No surprise, since my body had a hard time sweating back then. I'm sure it was because I was not drinking enough water. I outgrew the phase of not sweating after I made water consumption a priority. I still don't like extreme hot temperatures, but I am better at coping with them now. Mom came and brought me to the girls' bunkhouse and cooled me down with ice. I remember cooling down, but I have no memory of wandering, crying, or being found. By age 18, I had been letting Audrey Hepburn movies teach me how a woman should dress and act with grace, beauty, and allure. Before doing this, I was quite clumsy, a quirk that still reveals itself in me when I am in a hurry. I put makeup on and became a model to my bedroom mirror. I wondered why no boys really pursued me yet, but I knew at college the cute ones that gave me butterflies in my stomach must surely be waiting for me eagerly, ready to date and marry me as soon as possible. There was just one thing to take care of first, the one thing that, if not done, would make me an outcast at college. I had not yet been baptized as I was taught a true Christian should. Without that, I couldn't eat the crackers and grape juice in church, and word would spread like wildfire who did and who did not partake in communion in the very first week of college. I already lived a very pure life as a Christian would, but I could not stand up in front of a crowd and be dunked in water for all to see. I had watched plenty of other baptisms, and I always felt embarrassed enough just watching those people do it. So the night before Dad and I flew down for my 5th and final year of camp, Mom was too tired to do it for my last year, but she drove us to the airport. I filled the hotel bathtub while Mom and Dad watched TV. "Dad, will you baptize me? I filled the tub," I asked. Dad was overjoyed, but said the tub was too small. The pool hours were over for the night. We got up early to use the pool, but a grumpy man was there cleaning it. "Nope, closed for maintenance," he snapped. Even after Dad explained why we needed it, the guy would not budge. So Dad called down to his sister, who lived in the city where we would be landing, and had her prepare the baptistry at the church she attended. It was the same place my brother had been baptized the year before. He had showed up to college unbaptized, and it was not long before he was convinced to do it by his roommates. All I had to do was survive the flight. "Oh, look down here. This is where JFK Jr.'s plane went down earlier this summer," Dad exclaimed as we soared above the airport. "Dad, I really don't want to hear that right now," I whined. A few minutes later, the plane made a loud boom, and we all shook with the vibrations. It turned out to be the oxygen tank stirring, but for a minute my heart was in my throat. I didn't want to die and go to hell, which is what I had been taught would happen. Not when I was so close to salvation. The threat of hell had been hanging over me my entire life until I finally got dunked in that water. As Dad lowered me into the water and back up, I felt like the same person. I did feel the joy of the other few who were there, though, and an overwhelming sense of acceptance from them. I was part of a large family that had my back, at least for now.